Hey guys, Brandy Churchwell here from 13th Juror Podcast. If you are following the Karen Reed case, you know that one of the most debated arguments is whether or not the search for How Long to Die in the Cold was searched by Jen McCabe at 2:27 a.m. or if it only showed up at 2:27 a.m. on the report, but it was really done later on, like after 6 a.m. when John's body was found. Now, this debate has suddenly turned all of social media into software programmers and cell data experts, and it seems that most people tend to agree with whichever explanation suits the theory of their chosen side. So I decided to go straight to a software developer and programmer who doesn't care anything about sides or who's right or wrong, and ask him to explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. So I took his explanation and the explanations from the attorneys and court documents, and I kind of put it all together so that you can decide for yourself what you believe. So the controversy really started because the 2:27 a.m. search didn't show up when the state used Cellebrite to image and download the contents of Jen McCabe's phone, but it was found by the defense when they used an updated version of Cellebrite about a year later. So the search itself wasn't found on the iPhone's SQLite database, which is what stores all of the history information. Instead, it was found in a deleted WAL file that was retrieved from the iPhone's Apple file system, which is basically a proprietary file system developed by Apple. So the discovery was due to the fact that Cellebrite only recently started attempting to recover such files for the purposes of their forensic analyses. Now, the state's expert, Jessica Hyde, she's not disputing that the search exists in this file. Rather, she's saying that she doesn't know why it's there, stating, quote, a definitive reason as to why the timestamp is listing the time of 2:27:40 is unknown, end quote. Now, she goes on to say that the other timestamps, based on testing and artifact knowledge, are more accurate in observing the time searched. Now, it's important to keep in mind that this artifact knowledge that she's using as her basis for her conclusion is limited to just what she knows and understands from her experience and training. But like I mentioned, this technology that now allows for Cellebrite to extract this information is all new. So her knowledge and understanding of how to interpret it would logically be the reason that she says that it's unknown. So in order to understand it, we have to first kind of understand a little bit of background. So Cellebrite is an Israeli company that's infamous in the security and free from government overreach portion of the internet. Now, if you watch trials or you've done any kind of research on phone privacy, then you probably already know that Apple has been kind of at like the forefront of protecting its users' safety and privacy. So much so that unlike any of the other big tech companies, they've gone toe to toe with the FBI over the past decade plus and have steadfastly refused to give in to FBI demands to create back doors into their phones. In fact, they actually, as they fought it out in these secret US courts, their software developers began enhancing their security so much that it became impossible for FBI to access iPhone data. So after pushing this time and time again and claiming, terrorists would win unless they got their way, they ended up being contacted by this company called Cellebrite, which is essentially a firm that was able to hack into the iPhone and access the data that the FBI couldn't. Now, Cellebrite has been playing sort of a cat and mouse game with Apple ever since, but they're able to provide a forensic analysis and imaging for iPhones where access has been granted by the user. It basically involves just a big dumping out of the entire file system contents and then kind of going from there. So Cellebrite is a name that we hear often in trials because they have become the gold standard in iPhone forensic analysis and are used now by pretty much all of the federal government agencies as well as law enforcement agencies all over the country. This is important because when Cellebrite delivers a report that says a file is found or data exists, law enforcement trusts this to be true without fail. And for good reason, like I said, gold standard. But here's the deal. Cellebrite experts and developers are obviously crazy smart. the newest one that the prosecution has brought in, Ian Whiffen, is said by Lally to have created software that all of these experts are using now. Now, we'll get into more of this in just a minute, but it's important to keep in mind that creating the software for Cellebrite to extract this information doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be able to be an expert in how to interpret or read the data. Because remember, Cellebrite takes all that info and basically dumps it out to go from there. So figuring out how to find it doesn't necessarily mean that you automatically know how to interpret or read it. So in order to understand the data itself, it requires expertise from a software developer or programmer that is familiar with the actual data and how it's coded. So that brings us to the embedded data system that is used by iPhone, known as SQLite. Now, when you see this written in reports, it's written like SQLite. And according to this software developer, this is the part that makes the timestamp for this search irrefutable. SQLite has been around for more than 20 years. It's a rock solid database that's used in every iPhone, Android, smart TV, smartwatch, router, you name it. It's installed on like tens of billions of devices worldwide. Now, the wide adoption over the past couple of decades has turned it into an extremely mature, well-tested database. A while back, SQLite implemented a write-ahead log, or WAL, W-A-L, which is a crash recovery mechanism, and it's kind of at the heart of this specific piece of evidence. So before the implementation of the write-ahead log, you had one single file that represented a database. Now, if you wanted to insert, let's say, a new search entry, the program would have to lock the file so that no other application could use it, insert the data into the file, and then release the lock. If you have multiple applications trying to access the same file, then it creates a bottleneck and it can have an impact on efficiency of the device that you're using. So simple terms, slows things down. So the WAL, or write-ahead log, was implemented to kind of alleviate that bottleneck and improve efficiency. Basically, instead of blocking access to the DB file, a second file is created that stores the recent inserts. And the code is written so that there are what they call checkpoints, where all of the newly entered data is put back into the main DB file and the WAL file is deleted. Okay, so I'm no programmer or developer. So this to me felt kind of like a foreign language. So the best way that I could visualize it, because I'm a visual learner, is to picture how Google Sheets works when I'm working in it. So if I click on a cell and start typing, I can see everything that I'm typing in an enlarged and highlighted cell, but none of it is actually added to the actual document yet. The highlighted cell is temporarily holding all of the information that I'm typing in until I'm done with it. Then it will add it permanently to my Google Sheet. Now, in this analogy, hitting the enter button would be the equivalent of instigating one of these checkpoints. In SQLite, however, a command like that may trigger a checkpoint. It might, but it's not necessarily required for one, because the code is written so that by default, a checkpoint is done automatically when the WAL file reaches a certain threshold size, or if it has been more than 5 minutes since the last checkpoint. Now, 5 minutes is a lot different than 4 hours, and that's important. So back to Google Sheets. This highlighted cell where I'm adding and changing these things, that's how I envision this WAL file. It's just a temporary file that's holding all of these changes that will be added to the main file in the future. So these WAL files have become kind of a staple of modern database architecture. And anyone who's dealt with databases extensively over the last decade or so, and we're not talking about me, we're talking about the fellow I've been talking to about this, they would have an understanding of what it is and how it works. So back to the case. The defense asked Cellebrite to perform an updated analysis, and this seemingly new information appeared, including a 2:27 a.m. search from a deleted WAL file. Now, the state's expert, Jessica Hyde, agrees that the file was there. She's not disputing that. But she didn't seem to know what exactly the WAL file was, and she stuck to her original assessment of the searches only being done later in the morning after 6 a.m. So the state also implied at this time that because this WAL file is shown as deleted and the phone user can't just randomly delete those files, that the defense's assessment must be wrong. Now, this isn't really an effective argument for the few who have a true understanding of how this works, but it could possibly be effective in casting doubt for the average person who doesn't know much about how this works. So, looking at the 2:27 a.m. search, the forensic analysis demonstrates that within the WAL file, there's a record indicating that a search tab was switched at that time. So what this means is that the search for how long to die in the cold was likely entered seconds or up to 5 minutes prior to this, but no later, since the timestamp provided is clear to that point. Now, there was an additional timestamp recovered related to the basketball tab, but the forensic analysis shows that the timestamp was a number of microseconds different. So the state has attempted to use this to disprove the search, but according to the software developer, it doesn't actually disprove it at all. The iPhone would have inserted activity of both the tab she was on and the tab she was switching to, and the switch would have differed by a very minute amount, like microseconds. So, as I mentioned before, SQLite does checkpoints. These checkpoints don't happen every second, but they're also not separated by days or hours. They are defaulted to occur every 5 minutes if one hasn't already been triggered by some kind of command or the size of the file exceeding a certain point. So these checkpoints are the time when that temporary WAL file is deleted and the contents that were on it are placed onto the main DB file. So this will either insert or overwrite data that's already in the file. So Jen McCabe performs this search. It's stored in the WAL file. At some point, the WAL file is deleted and the search data is placed into the main DB file. So this is the point where I have a question, because my question was, if she deletes the search for how long to die in the cold, then based on the defense's theory, she performs it hours later, realizing that someone might forensically search her phone at some point. Why would there be no trace of this search within the DB file during the first Cellebrite extraction? Because after all, we've seen trials where deleted information is recovered and used against a defendant. So this is where that background on Apple comes in. Remember that cat and mouse game that I mentioned at the beginning, where Apple is constantly changing things around to protect their users' data and information. So starting with iOS 12, Apple started using what they call secure delete pragma, which is used to control how things are deleted from the database. So normally, deleted content, like searches, are just marked as unused, but they're still able to be retrieved in extractions, and they can show that they were marked to be deleted. Now, Apple, constantly wanting to outrun these programs that can hack into their information, developed this secure delete option starting with iOS 12. Now, when it's enabled, SQLite will actually go out of its way to overwrite the data with zeros or blank data, making it unable to be recovered from these extractions. And everything after iOS 12 has it automatically built in and enabled. So, Jen McCabe is on an iPhone 11, and the iOS system that she was using is listed on the report as 15.2.1, meaning this secure delete option would have been built into the code for her phone. So a forensic analysis of the file itself would show nothing and look like nothing had been deleted. If Cellebrite had left the software where it was a couple of years ago and all we would have seen was that first Cellebrite report where no 2:27 a.m. or deleted items occurred, we never would have known any different. Now, prior to Apple enabling this feature in SQLite, it probably would have still been useful for Cellebrite to attempt to recover WAL files, but it wasn't necessary, since the deleted files would still appear within the DB file anyway. They would still come up and just show as deleted. So the state's expert, Jessica Hyde, has experience interpreting reports, but not necessarily experience in the actual data recovery or understanding WAL files. And that's not surprising given, she wouldn't have even needed to understand it, since Cellebrite only just started recovering those files last year. And they really only just started recovering those files because, the previous iOS versions weren't securely deleting data from the DB files. So when Jen McCabe deletes her history of the search, poof, gone from the DB file. It looks like nothing was ever there. But Cellebrite now goes deeper than that. Remember, cat and mouse. So they pulled the deleted files directly from the Apple file system. After the WAL file was checkpointed, it was deleted automatically. But the data remained in that file system, and the WAL files are not subject to that secure delete feature. So this is the way that all modern file systems apparently work. When a file is deleted, the data itself isn't removed, but rather the operating system is just informed like, hey, you can go ahead and overwrite that area of data whenever you want to. And they just kind of treat it as an empty space. Now, if you look at the device, or if you use the device long enough, the data will eventually be overwritten. But in this case, if you look at the time that they took her phone, it was only just a couple days after the search. So the file data was still intact. Now, in the most recent pre-trial hearing, we hear ADA Lally saying that the Cellebrite expert, Ian Whiffen, creates the software that all of these experts are using, and that he gives his opinion that the search happened at 6:23 a.m. and 6:24 a.m. So the thing is, he doesn't say anything in the hearing about Whiffen denying that the search also happened at 2:27 a.m. And he also doesn't really give an explanation that the software that the experts are using is created to grab the data and dump it, but not necessarily interpret it. So the theory that is backed by this data is this. Jen McCabe performs this search and switched the tabs. In the preceding minutes, SQLite checkpointed the data and it inserted it into the DB file. Jen maybe realized at some point that she shouldn't have left evidence like that and deletes the search, and it was gone from the permanent DB file. Given knowledge of basic law enforcement forensics, maybe she thinks, I need to be able to, explain this search if it comes up later. So she searches it at the time that they find John's body and says in her statement that she searched it because Karen told her to search this. But as the programmer explained to me, the database doesn't lie. The WAL file timestamp is unequivocal, and the fact that it was found within the WAL file, not the DB file, not only proves that she performed the search sometime between 2:22 a.m. and 2:27 a.m., but it also proves that she deleted the search since it wasn't in the DB file at the timestamp due to the secure delete feature. So the WAL is an integral part of the SQLite database, and the timestamps can't just appear in the past for such a file. It's not possible that the 6:23 or 6:24 a.m. search somehow bled over into this past file. It's not how it works. The sequence of events is just how the database works. There's no way to make it work otherwise. So, he says, what it comes down to is this. The search timestamp isn't about expert opinions, it's about fact. And there's no way to give an opinion on how the program works because it's all in a code that you can't really argue with, and it's not up for debate. So, does this get us any closer to justice for John O'Keefe? Let me know what you think in comments, and for an interactive timeline and more information on the case, you can visit 13thjurorpodcast.com.